Hello again everyone, Bear from Bear Reads Books. In the garden again, it's my favourite spot. No chickens yet, but give it time. There's a dog around here somewhere too. Nonfiction November. Well, not Nonfiction November, I'm going to do a couple of readathons in November, and if you've watched the October wrap-up video, you would have seen my struggles throughout October, and I'm hoping November's going to be a little bit more relaxing, but I'm also going to purposefully be a little bit more relaxed in my reading. So while I've got a ton of books in front of me here, and I wish you could see this table that I've got in front of me, while I've got a ton of books in front of me, I'm not promising I'm going to read all of these. In fact, I'm not promising I'm going to read anything. I'm just saying that here's some non-fiction that I recommend that I've read in the past. And like in a lot of the other non-fiction November books, a lot of people have done recommendation lists and then moved on to TBR lists. So I'm going to do the same. So a recommendation list of stuff I've read recently, in the last couple of years at least, because I had to go back a couple of years just to get a reasonable list in. And then the stuff, the non-fiction stuff that I've got on my current TBR that I'm going to show you everything that I've got, and then which ones I'm going to read I don't know. I'm just going to play it by ear and see which ones take my fancy as I go. I mean, there's some pretty serious stuff here, and there's some audio books and some physical books, so it's a good mix. And I have another overseas holiday coming. It's insane, but this is my third overseas holiday of the year of 2019, and I don't usually do this, but it's been a very strange year for travel. And this time it's the four of us, my family, plus the in-laws that are coming to stay with us for 3 months from France. So they arrive in about 2 to 3 weeks' time. And they spend a week, and then we go to Fiji for a week, and then they're here for another couple of months after that. So it'll be an exciting time. So I've got a week in Fiji with long flights and stuff where I've got a lot of time to read. So I'm hoping, and I'm going to pretty much go with non-fiction, but I am going to try and do November and Novella November as well. So let's start with novellas, because there's just a couple I want to cover that I think I'm going to try and do, maybe, and they're small, so I'll see how I go. And all physical books, one of which is a reread and two of which I haven't read before. Let's go with the one which is a reread, which I have mentioned on a video before, and it's this almost unmarked copy of Voltaire's Candide. And I didn't really think of it as a novella until I googled it, and it said 17th century novella. If you remember me talking about this, it's about a young man called Candide who's lived a reasonably sheltered existence, and he decides to go out into the world and get into adventures, which seems to be my motto for everything. And he finds when he goes out into the world how sheltered his life has actually been, because he hates it. And all this stuff happens to him when he gets out of his comfort zone and goes into the real world. He finds that all these crazy things happen to him, that he hates it. And it's just a hysterical 17th century satirical romp, and I love it. And I've read it probably 2 or 3 times already, and I'm going to read this copy again sometime in November, I hope. It's super fun. If you've never read Candide, or if you've never read anything 17th century French satire, this is where to start. It is amazing. Funny, easy enough to read, like nothing crazy in the syntax or the sentence structure. So just have a crack at it. It is so funny. So that's a reread and a novella. I mentioned this a month or 3 weeks ago as the Ballad of the Sad Cafe. In this particular collection, it's the novella Ballad of the Sad Cafe by Carson, McCullers, as well as a number of short stories. So if I get to the short stories, great. If I don't, great. I'm really just aiming for the novella itself, which is the Ballad of the Sad Cafe, which runs to about 60, 70 pages, something like that, I think. Yeah, maybe closer to 100. So, which, by all reports, has an incredible bar fight scene, which I can't wait for. I listened to an episode of Book Fight, my favourite books podcast, and an incredible bar fight scene in this book. So, I can't wait. For those of you hearing birds in the background, you're not going crazy. It is magpies having a great old time in my backyard. And the other novella I'm going to have a shot at is Kynan Jones's Cove, this tiny little book that I picked up secondhand at a library sale not so long ago. It messes around with form and function, so it should be really interesting, and I can't wait to give it a shot. Hypnotic, compelling and exciting. Meditative, pared down yet powerful. Like me, really. So there's those three. That's all for Novella November. I didn't really want to overtax myself. I've still got other novels on my shelves that I need to finish. I've got Woman in White by McCullers. I've got Murakami that I've started and not finished. So those things still need to be read. On top of that, let's talk non-fiction. So, non-fiction November is all about reading non-fiction, and since I started this little YouTube channel, it's all your fault, since I started this little YouTube channel I haven't read a single non-fiction. It's all been fiction. And BookTube is awash with fiction, and that's understandable. It started from YA and now it's all about fiction. So, Stephen Donahue's channel is great because he talks about, and I'll put a link down below, he talks a lot about non-fiction books, and he's got this massive library and all these book hauls and stuff he buys, all non-fiction. It's great. I do have non-fiction and some really interesting stuff, so I'm going to try and get to it in November. How much? Dunno. Which ones? Dunno. But I've got a holiday and I've got some long flights, so we'll give it a shot. So, in no particular order, there are some Australian thingies in here. Let's talk about this one first. It is the Quarterly Essay. Now this is a quarterly essay publication specifically from Australia, and this one, and each time they get a single author to write a large piece, and there's a couple of smaller pieces in here in response or on a similar theme, but they get a single author, in this case Noel Pearson, who's an Aboriginal civil rights lawyer and activist in Australia, and he has written a piece for the Quarterly Essay almost 3 years ago now, called A Rightful Place, Race Recognition and a More Complete Commonwealth. And it's talking about recognition of Aboriginal people in the Australian Constitution and moving forward towards reconciliation by giving Aboriginal people a voice in the Constitution, enshrined in the Constitution and in law. Sounds like a sensible idea. Unfortunately, in Australia, there's resistance to such things. Hence, writing about it in a politicised way like this. It's renowned in Australia, but and I've never read it, so I'm going to read it. If you're outside of Australia and you'd like to know a little bit about the challenges facing Indigenous people in Australia, then you would do well to read this. It is non-fiction. It is not a story. This is real. I'm going to read this. Noel Pearson, very, very intelligent man, and is in the media a lot in Australia, talking about Indigenous rights, and I can't wait. It's been on my shelf for a while, and I need to read this. Quarterly Essay, A Rightful Place by Noel Pearson. Let's stick with the other Australian one, which is this, Behrouz Boochani, No Friend But the Mountain. This is an amazing story. To give you a little bit of an idea, this gentleman here, Behrouz Boochani, have I got that right? Yes, Behrouz Boochani was a refugee who wished to come to Australia. On the way to Australia in a boat, he was captured or stopped before entering Australia, and with our current policy of offshore detention, he was sent to an offshore detention centre, and we've got a couple of them. He has been there being assessed as a refugee for about 5 years, I think the current count of time is. So he is essentially a prisoner, a criminal. We've branded him, apparently. And he wrote this book because he became friends with a man called Peter Grester, who is an Australian dog. Go away. he became friends with an Australian journalist called Peter Grester, who himself was detained in a foreign country for reporting the news in a foreign country. He has since been returned to Australia, and Behrouz Boochani became friends with Peter Grester and communicated this book to Peter Grester via WhatsApp message over the space of many, many months. And then those WhatsApp messages were then turned into this book. That, all by itself, is an incredible story, but built in around that story, not just about how the book was written, but the contents of the book about what this man was fleeing in the country he chose to leave, and what he was hoping to achieve by coming here to Australia, and what he's experienced being in detention for the last 5 years is the real story. Not how the story was written by WhatsApp message, but why he needed to write that. So can't wait. Again, it's another one that's been on my list for a long time. If you're outside of an Australian setting, you should still be able to get this. It is an important story to tell, and it's an important story to know. So please get on it. Another one. I think I've mentioned this one before. Three Women by Lisa Taddeo. Nonfiction. I've had a couple of comments on the last video that I mentioned that some people loved it, some people didn't quite, and some people even did not finish it. It is... I think I've talked to it already, so I'm going to give it a crack. I want to give it a crack. I hope I get to it. Made by Humans by Ellen Broad. If you've read the novel by... what's her name? I've got it right here. Angela Meyer, called A Superior Spectre, a novel. It was a dystopian future, very strange, and I didn't quite get into it, but there's been some very good reviews. It's been up for a few awards. It just missed the mark for me. But last year I heard a panel discussion between Ellen Broad, who's a data scientist and an AI expert, artificial intelligence expert, and Angela Meyer, the author of A Superior Spectre, on a panel talking about AI and the future of automation and robots, because this her novel touches on those issues. And it was a super interesting discussion. You had a person hardly rooted in, very much rooted in science, and a person very much rooted in fiction, having a very, very interesting discussion about the ethics of robots and about artificial intelligence. It was great. So I bought Ellen Broad's book, and I also read A Superior Spectre. While Superior Spectre was not quite for me, this I haven't read yet, and I'm hoping it's going to be tops. So I can't wait for that. The other one I have on my list, now this is, remember, this list is stuff I want to read, not my recommendations. I'm going to get to those in a minute, but is The Uninhabitable Earth. That's hard to say. The Uninhabitable Earth by David Wallace-Wells. Been a whole lot of discussion about this online. I don't know whether on BookTube or not, but a whole lot of discussion to say that this is a seriously important book to have read, but it will just make you sad for the state of the world we live in, and the horrible things we have done to it. So, one balancing the other, I would like to read this, The Uninhabitable Earth by David Wallace-Wells. He was deputy editor of New York Magazine, and he published a story surveying the landscape of the worst case scenarios for global warming. It became the most read story the magazine had ever published, sparking an unprecedented debate, still ongoing, about just how we should be thinking and talking about the planetary threat from climate change. This book is the result. Can't wait. So they are my non-fiction things that I hope to read. Now, if you also bear with me, I'm going to talk to you about the books that I've read in the last 1 or 2 years in a non-fiction space as recommendations. And it's not everything I've ever read. Some of them might actually be a couple more years old than that. Some of them are in boxes somewhere around the place, and I haven't been able to find my actual copy. So I'll flash the picture up there for you. And excuse me while I have a look on Goodreads just to get the details, because I don't have the physical book in front of me. The first one And I know my American friends like explorer stories, you know, the frontier stories, those kinds of things. And we do too in Australia, and we have some great explorers. You know, we've got a country that's essentially empty in the middle, and when white people got here, the first thing they did was walk around and try and find out what was here and do horrible things to the indigenous peoples, but that's another story. One of my favourite explorers is two explorers, Burke and Wills. So Mr. Burke and Mr. Wills. And in the 19th century, they formed a team to go from the southern part near Adelaide, the southern part, to cross the desert through the centre of Australia, right up to the tip of Australia, with the view to marking a telegraph route that they could then build later. So they were commissioned by the Royal Society to go. They took way too much stuff, and yet they were still seriously underprepared, and it was the greatest exploration disaster of Australian history. And it's hilarious because they were completely inept. And the book that I read that made me fall in love with these explorers is called The Dig Tree, D-I-G, The Dig Tree, by Sarah Murgatroyd. And I'll put this spelling down below. The Dig Tree refers to when these explorers finally died. Spoiler! When these explorers finally died, one of them carved onto a tree, dig here, with an arrow. And underneath the arrow he had buried about a week's worth of provisions and food. And the person that camped in that spot didn't see the sign and didn't find the food and died not just a couple of kilometres from that sign. Just horrible. And then the other one just died in a ditch somewhere half a day away. It was ridiculous. They were horrible. The worst explorers ever. But it's a great story. Really is a great story. The Dig Tree, The Story of Burke and Wills by Sarah Murgatroyd. And again, if you're interested in Australian explorers, this guy's not necessarily Australian, but there's a great, I'll call it Australian. We claim everyone. We claim New Zealanders if we have to. But this guy's called Hubert Wilkins, and he was involved in lots of polar expeditions. He was involved in a southern expedition and a northern expedition, balloon expeditions, dog sled expeditions. He even had a crazy idea to go under the polar ice caps by submarine. He was a mad explorer, Hubert Wilkins, and the book is called The Last Explorer, and the book is by Cynan Nasht, N-A-S-H-T, Cynan Nasht. And again, it's a great story. He was a hard man who survived so many expeditions to the North Pole, South Pole, and all over the place, doing all sorts of crazy nonsense. I just love these crazy explorers doing ridiculous things. So check that one out as well. It's one of the best. And I don't read biographies very much, but those two biographies of Burke and Wills and of Hubert Wilkins are amazing. For a bit of fun, I really do like The Poisoners Handbook. This is a few years old now, but I always seem to take a quick look at it whenever I see it on my shelf. Oh, I remember that so fondly. It was so much fun and really weird and quirky. It's called The Poisoner's Handbook by Deborah Blum, Murder and the Birth of Forensic Medicine in Jazz Age New York. And it's case studies of men and women who have poisoned other people, or how people have been poisoned doing stupid things again, crazy things, thinking that they were just testing something. Or how someone's off their husband/wife, or how someone's, conned someone out of their house. It's just, there's all sorts of crazy stuff going on here. And I didn't realise until just now that the 3 books that I've chosen thus far are all just about ridiculous people doing ridiculous things. So The Poisoner's Handbook, about the birth of forensic medicine in Jazz Age New York. by Deborah Blum. It is great. Read it quite a few years ago now, but I keep revisiting it. Couple more, if you could bear with me, recommendations. There is one author, Australian author, who does true crime really well, and his name is John Safran, S-A-F-R-A-N. He's a young man that started off doing videography many years ago, and he's made short films, and he's then gone into writing very much satirical comedy sort of stuff, and now he's branched out into true crime purely by accident. He went investigating something to do with the Ku Klux Klan, and then while he was doing that, something else happened, and that's turned into this book, Murder in Mississippi, where the Grand Wizard of the Ku Klux Klan was tied up in a scandal with a black man and some homosexual sex. Intriguing. Anyway, it's really interesting because there's interviews and everything with all the players. So there's this one, Murder in Mississippi, and there's this one, Depends What You Mean by Extremist, which is all about right-wing extremists in this age of right-wing extremists. Both by John Safran. So this is Eggshell Skull by Bri Lee. Another Australian release, but it's an important story, and I really hope some of you choose to read it. I was given this one by the publisher, so it is a pre-release copy, but the final cover did look something like this with a big white skull on the front. It's quite impressive. Bri Lee was a lawyer in Queensland, Australia, so the same state as me, and for years she watched as men would come before the courts accused of rape and sexual assault, and she would watch as they then got off and didn't receive any penalty. And then she was herself a survivor of sexual assault. It brought up so many horrible memories for her that she was drinking too much and her life was just sliding into ruin. So interspersed through this book are some very tough scenario, very difficult and confronting stories of sexual assault and rape, including the story of Bri Lee herself. So that's just a warning to anyone that chooses to read this. It is quite confronting, but it is an excellent non-fiction story. It tells of, first of all, how Bri Lee gets her own life back and what she does to help other women in this situation, the same as her, navigate the court system to get a better result for themselves. And I don't know whether there is in the book a final solution that you could say was a measurable result, but it's an eye-opener nonetheless. An excellent book. If you can find it anywhere, even grab it online, Bri Lee, Eggshell Skull. So that's it for my non-fiction. There was quite a few recommendations there and a whole bunch of things that I'm going to put on my TBR, both for non-fiction November and for Novella November. I hope you like all of those. I'm not going to read all of those. I'm promising you that right now as the last day of October or the first day of November, whenever you happen to watch this. I'm not going to read all of these. These are just the ones on my TBR or ones that I really liked in the past. But I'm not going to put myself in the position that I had in October, where I felt that I had overcommitted myself. All I'm saying to you in November is these are the books on my TBR that I would like to read. I'm not creating an order for reading them. I'm not creating a list or saying which one I'm going to read first, second or third. I am going to finish the stuff that I have on my books right now unfinished, like Woman in White by Wilkie Collins. And then I'm going to read whichever I like. I also have an audiobook, and I forgot about the audiobook. The audiobook that I have for non-fiction November is Permanent Record by Edward Snowden, and I should mention that. I'll put a little picture up here. That's only a new one out, so I'll say that again slower because I got all excited. Permanent Record by Edward Snowden. So I've got that on audiobook, so that can go. Definitely read that. As soon as I finish Silver, I'll read Edward Snowden. And so that'll be on audiobook, and I can read other things as that goes. But not overcommitting, just telling you what I've got. Got it? Got it. So that's it for my November. So you've now had an October wrap-up and a November TBR. Hopefully there'll be some reports throughout November on how all these have gone. I'm looking forward to it. You know, novellas are nice and short. Non-fiction, yeah, it's alright. I like it. Haven't done it for a while, but it should be fun. Enjoy the rest of your day. It's getting dark here, so I hope the picture. This is late in the afternoon. Hopefully the picture's okay. But enjoy the rest of your day, evening, week, weekend, wherever you may be, and I will talk to you again soon. Great catching up. Bye.